Why is it that so many of us, so many who feel a deep stirring inside, who sense a quiet knowing beyond the noise of daily life, find ourselves trapped in thought? We sit awake at night, turning over every conversation, every choice, every memory, as if some answer hides in the endless cycles of our mind. And you might think, if awareness is our gift, if consciousness is our guide, why would it allow this endless spinning? Why would it let us drown in our own reflections, lost in a sea of what-ifs and if-onlys? But what if this is not a curse? What if this restless, obsessive thinking, the very thing that leaves you exhausted, frustrated, anxious, is not a flaw, not a weakness, but a signal? A signal that your mind is trying in its own imperfect way to wake you up, to pull you toward clarity, to force you to look deeper. And yet, in its insistence, it can also blind you. It can hold you hostage, convincing you that insight comes from overanalyzing, that truth lies in endless reasoning, when in fact it is not the thinking itself, but the awareness behind it that leads to awakening. This is the hidden trap, the subtle, silent, invisible snare that keeps sensitive souls busy with thought, while the world within waits patiently for you to stop and finally see. You see, overthinking is not just a habit. It is a subtle trap woven so carefully into your consciousness that it feels like part of who you are. It whispers to you constantly, promising clarity, promising understanding, promising safety, but in reality, it isolates you from what truly matters. Every thought you spin, every scenario you play over and over in your mind, creates a loop, a cycle that feels familiar, even comforting, even though it is quietly suffocating you. And what is it that overthinking feeds on? It feeds on fear, the fear of making mistakes, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of the unknown. It feeds on attachment to outcomes, to identities, to illusions of control. And so the mind becomes a stage, a theater where every imagined conversation, every invented scenario, every memory long past is replayed endlessly. You might think you are learning from these thoughts, that by analyzing, by dissecting, by worrying, you are moving toward understanding. But this is an illusion, because thinking alone does not lead to awakening. Thinking is a tool, a sharp, precise tool, but the mind has a tendency to use it as a cage instead of a ladder. And in this cage we convince ourselves that wisdom lies in complexity, that insight can only be found in endless reflection. We mistake activity for understanding, repetition for growth, and the more we indulge, the stronger the chains become. Consider for a moment the river of your thoughts. It rushes and churns without pause. You try to catch a single drop, to pin it down, to study it, to make sense of it. And yet the river never stops. It cannot. Its nature is movement. And the harder you try to control it, the more turbulent it becomes. The mind, left unchecked, will spiral. And in this spiral you miss the silence behind the current, the stillness that already holds the answers. And what are the answers that overthinking hides from you? They are simple, profound, waiting not in the spinning wheel of thought, but in the quiet awareness that observes it. The mind asks, why did I say that? What if I fail? What if I hurt someone? And so you go deeper, layer upon layer, trying to untangle reality from imagination, truth from fear. But the very act of untangling, of dissecting, keeps you from seeing the unity that is already present. The subtle trick of overthinking is that it disguises itself as responsibility, as insight, as intelligence. You may tell yourself, I am careful, I am discerning, I am learning, and yet, beneath the surface, there is an exhaustion, a subtle emptiness, a gnawing sense that something vital is slipping through your fingers. You feel restless, distracted, never fully here, never fully now. And in this distraction, in this constant mental labor, you forget one simple truth. Life is not meant to be figured out. It is meant to be experienced. And here is the irony. The very tool that could illuminate your path, your mind, becomes the obstacle to illumination. You try to find yourself by thinking. You try to reach awakening by analyzing, and yet awakening does not reside in the accumulation of thought. It resides in the quiet space between thoughts, in the simple awareness that watches, that notices, that breathes. It is always present, always accessible, but overthinking pulls you away from it. Think of it like this. Imagine a person standing in a forest, looking for a hidden path. They study every leaf, every branch, every footprint on the ground, searching for a sign. And in this searching, they miss the very path beneath their feet. They become so absorbed in examination that they cannot see what is already there. Overthinking works in the same way. You scrutinize every feeling, every impulse, every thought, while the path to awakening the simplicity of presence remains underfoot. And the mind, clever as it is, will justify this. It will say you must think, you must analyze, you must prepare. You must understand fully before acting. And so you wait. You wait for the perfect clarity that never comes. And in waiting, life passes by. Moments of insight slip past unnoticed. Opportunities for presence, for connection, for awakening are lost in the churning wheel of thought. And yet there is a subtle lesson hidden in this trap. Overthinking, as exhausting as it is also a signal. It is the mind's way of pointing to what matters, what you truly care about, what you are afraid to confront. It is a symptom, not the problem itself. The problem is the mind's unwillingness to release control, to rest in the moment, to trust the flow of life. And here lies the paradox. In your attempts to master life through thought, you remain trapped. In your attempts to understand through analysis, you remain blind to the simplicity that is already here. So what is the way out? Not through suppression, not through judgment, not through fighting with the mind, but through awareness, through observation, through gentle recognition of the patterns that keep you spinning. Notice the thoughts without chasing them. Notice the fears without feeding them. Notice the restlessness without trying to fix it. And in this noticing, something extraordinary begins to happen. The mind slowly stops being a cage. It begins to reveal its true purpose. because the mind, when understood, can be a ladder. It can show you patterns, it can illuminate connections, it can guide you toward insight. But only when you are not entangled, only when you are not consumed by it, only when you learn to observe, to breathe, to be present, to see the river without being swept away by the current. And here is another subtle trap of overthinking. It is seductive. It makes you feel like you are awake, like you are conscious, like you are progressing. But awakening is not thinking more. Awakening is seeing more, feeling more, being more. It is discovering the stillness that underlies the noise, the clarity that underlies the confusion, the light that underlies the shadow. So understand this. Overthinking is not your enemy. It is your teacher, your mirror, your challenge. But only if you are willing to step back, to stop believing the mind is the master, and start recognizing that it is a servant, a tool, not a prison. And in this recognition, in this subtle shift, the first seeds of awakening are planted. And perhaps the most difficult part is that this trap is invisible. You may not even realize you are caught. You may think you are careful, intelligent, awake. And yet the mind quietly spins, unnoticed, and the hours, the days, the years pass in this quiet captivity until one day you notice, until one day you feel the ache of being disconnected from life, from the moment, from yourself. And in noticing, the choice emerges. You can continue to feed the wheel, to spin endlessly, to chase certainty in a world that has none. Or you can pause, you can breathe. You can step back and simply watch, and in that watching a door opens, a door to clarity, to presence, to awakening. Overthinking will not disappear overnight. It will return again and again. But the difference is this: you are no longer its prisoner. You are the observer. You are the awareness that sees the trap, that understands the pattern, that knows there is a way through. And in this awareness, the mind becomes a guide rather than a jailer. It begins to show you not what to fear, not what to regret, not what to obsess over, but what is true, what is real, what matters. And so the first step toward awakening from overthinking is simple, yet profound. Notice. Watch the mind without judgment. See the patterns without getting lost in them. Feel the fear without being consumed. And in this simple noticing, the infinite begins to unfold. Because you see, life is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be experienced. And awakening is not found in endless analysis. It is found in the quiet, in the presence, in the stillness behind the spinning thoughts. Now that you have begun to notice the mind, the spinning wheel of thought, it is time to go deeper. For overthinking is not just a habit, it is a reflection, a mirror showing you what your soul is reaching for, even when the mind cannot understand it. Every worry, every imagined scenario, every what-if you chase is pointing towards something beyond the thought itself. It is pointing toward your longing for clarity, for truth, for presence. And yet most people never see this. They mistake the reflection for the source. They believe that by examining, analyzing, and dissecting endlessly, they will finally grasp reality. But reality is never grasped through thought alone. Reality is lived, it is experienced, it is felt, and overthinking obscures it. It layers the mind with complexity so that the simplicity of the moment is lost beneath the clutter. Consider for a moment a pond, perfectly still, its surface reflecting the sky. Toss a stone into it and the ripples scatter the reflection. Overthinking is like throwing stone after stone into the pond. Your mind is constantly disturbed, its surface never calm enough to see clearly. And yet, the answer is not to stop thinking entirely. That is impossible. The mind will always think. The answer is to learn how to let the ripples settle, to return to the stillness, to see the reflection undisturbed. And what is the reflection showing you? It shows you your own patterns, your own fears, your own attachments. It shows you where your attention has been scattered, where your energy has been consumed, where your awareness has been absent. Overthinking is the map of your mind. If you are willing to look at it carefully, it tells you not only what you think, but what you value, what you fear, what you resist, and what you avoid. And here is the subtlety. The mind wants to control this reflection. It wants to tell you that by thinking harder, by analyzing longer, by obsessing more, you will finally reach insight. But insight is never found through force. Insight is found through patience, through observation, through surrender, through letting the pond's surface settle so that the reflection can appear in its full clarity. This is where meditation begins, not as a practice of escaping thought, but as a practice of watching it without judgment, without fear, without expectation. Watching it as a child watches the stars, as if seeing for the first time, noticing every detail without clinging. And in this watching, the mind slowly stops being a tyrant. It begins to show you what it has been trying to show all along, in its clumsy, relentless way. Because overthinking is not the enemy. It is the messenger. It is the signpost pointing toward your awakening, toward your presence, toward your deeper self. And yet the message is often obscured, hidden beneath layers of anxiety, fear, and resistance. You must be willing to dive beneath the surface, to see the thought not as a prison, but as a mirror, and in that reflection, discover what you have been avoiding. Think about the nature of attention. Wherever you focus, energy follows. And when you focus on the spinning, endless cycle of thoughts, on every possible mistake, on every imagined future, on every memory you cannot let go of, you are feeding the very trap that holds you. The mind grows stronger, more persistent, more insistent. The cage becomes more intricate, more suffocating. And yet, all it takes is a shift of focus, a quiet noticing, a gentle turning inward to the awareness that observes. And here is the paradox. The harder the mind works to control, the more elusive the truth becomes. But the gentler you become, the more patient, the more present, the clearer everything appears. It is like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips away. But if you open your hands, if you simply let it rest in the palm of awareness, it stays. And what does it mean to open your hands in this way? It means to stop trying to solve everything through thought. It means to allow uncertainty, to embrace the unknown, to see that life does not require your control. It means to recognize that awakening is not about having all the answers, but about being present for the questions, about feeling them fully, about seeing them clearly. And as you do this, something remarkable happens. The overthinking begins to transform. It does not disappear, but it changes. The thoughts no longer dominate your awareness. They no longer pull you into endless loops. Instead, they become gentle currents in a river, noticeable, acknowledged, yet no longer controlling. You begin to see the patterns, the connections, the meaning behind the mind's ceaseless activity. And here is where the real awakening begins. When you see that thought is not reality, that the stories you tell yourself are not truth, that the mind is not you, but a tool, a servant, a reflection. When this understanding takes root, the restlessness, the fear, the anxiety that once consumed you begins to soften. You begin to taste freedom, not the kind that comes from circumstances, but the kind that comes from seeing clearly, from knowing that presence, awareness, and love are always available, regardless of what the mind churns. And the mind, in its own strange way, becomes a teacher. It shows you where your attachments lie. It shows you where your fears are hidden. It shows you where your judgments have blinded you. And in this showing, you begin to respond, not react. You begin to move through life not as a victim of your thoughts, but as a conscious observer, a participant aware of the currents that once held you captive. And yet this path is not easy. The mind resists. It wants to cling, to spin, to dominate. It wants you to believe that thinking more, analyzing more, worrying more will save you. And so you must practice patience, gentleness, and compassion, not only for yourself, but for the mind itself. Recognize it as a part of you, a part that fears, a part that hopes, a part that longs to understand. And in this recognition, the first seeds of freedom blossom. Consider the analogy of a bird trapped in a cage. The bird struggles, flutters, beats its wings against the bars, convinced that freedom lies somewhere beyond the cage. And yet, the key has always been in its awareness. The moment it notices the cage for what it is, the moment it stops fighting and simply observes, the lock is revealed. And in that revelation, the bird can choose flight or stillness, fear or presence, captivity or freedom. And so overthinking is the cage, and awareness is the key. The more you practice noticing, observing, and allowing, the more the cage loosens its grip. The mind begins to show you its true purpose, not as a jailer, not as a tyrant, but as a guide, a tool, a reflection of what matters most. And in this guidance you begin to awaken, not in theory, not in concept, but in the quiet, living reality of presence. And finally, understand this. The trap of overthinking is universal. Every sensitive soul experiences it. Every seeker, every thinker, every awakened person has walked this path. And yet what distinguishes those who awaken from those who remain trapped is not intelligence, not discipline, not knowledge. It is presence. It is the capacity to step back, to notice, to breathe, to see, and to finally understand that thought is not the master. Awareness is. And in that awareness, in that simple, quiet, unassuming presence, awakening begins. Now, having noticed the mind, having observed its restless spinning, and having begun to see the reflection behind the thoughts, the question remains, what next? How do you move from observation to liberation, from noticing to awakening, from the endless cycles of thought to the quiet, profound presence that has always been waiting for you? The answer lies not in more thinking, not in more analysis, not in chasing solutions. The answer lies in integration. It lies in bringing the awareness that has been watching into every moment of your life. It is one thing to watch the mind while sitting quietly. It is another to carry that seeing into your relationships, your work, your decisions, your suffering, your joy. It is to allow presence to shape not only your perception, but your entire experience. Imagine for a moment a lake. The water is clear, still, reflecting the sky perfectly. When the wind blows, ripples disturb the surface. When a stone falls, the water shivers. But the clarity of the lake is never destroyed. It only waits for stillness to return. Awareness is that clarity. Overthinking is the wind and the stone. And your task is not to banish the wind, not to catch the stones mid-air, but to allow the water to return to its natural state, to let presence settle over the ripples, revealing the reflection that has always been there. And how do you cultivate this presence? Through practice, yes, but more importantly, through gentleness. Gentle noticing of the thoughts without clinging. Gentle recognition of fears without feeding them. Gentle acknowledgement of restlessness without trying to fix it. It is in the gentleness that the mind begins to relax, and in its relaxation, clarity emerges. You see, the mind is like a child. When you scold it, when you try to control it, it resists. When you approach it with patience, with understanding, with calm awareness, it begins to cooperate. It begins to show you what matters, what is true, what is essential. And here is another truth. Overthinking is often a mask for deeper emotions, fear, longing, grief, confusion. The mind spins not simply because it is curious, but because it is trying to process what the heart and soul have not yet understood. And so, awakening is not merely a mental exercise. It is a whole body, whole being practice. It is feeling, sensing, listening, observing, and finally, integrating. When you allow yourself to feel, to sense, to experience fully, the overthinking loses its grip. The mind becomes quiet, not because you have silenced it, but because you have listened to what it was trying to tell you all along. And now, let us speak of choice. The most powerful freedom in awakening is the freedom to choose where your attention goes. You cannot stop the mind from thinking, but you can choose whether to follow the spiral or to return to awareness. You can choose whether to be pulled into fear and regret or to anchor yourself in presence and clarity. Every moment is an opportunity to make this choice, to step out of the trap, to align with your deeper self, to awaken fully to life as it is. Consider the metaphor of the garden. The mind, left unchecked, is like a wild forest, dense with weeds, tangled, suffocating. Awareness is the gardener, and your task is to tend the garden not by destroying thought, but by nurturing the soil of presence, by planting seeds of clarity, patience, compassion, and love. Slowly, steadily, the garden begins to flourish. The weeds of obsessive thinking no longer dominate. They are acknowledged, understood, and allowed to coexist without taking over. The flowers of insight, peace, and understanding begin to bloom. And what does this awakening look like in daily life? It looks like noticing without judgment. It looks like responding rather than reacting. It looks like experiencing each moment fully without the filter of fear, without the endless commentary of the mind. It looks like loving deeply, not blindly, but with clarity. It looks like making decisions not from anxiety, but from alignment with your truth. It looks like freedom, not from circumstance, but from the tyranny of thought. And here is the subtle, profound irony. The more you allow presence, the less overthinking controls you. The more your life begins to unfold with effortless wisdom. The mind no longer needs to create drama, fear, or anxiety to feel alive. It begins to participate in life rather than dominate it. And in this participation, the very thing that once trapped you, your restless thinking, becomes a guide, a companion, a tool for deeper insight. And yet you must remember, this is not a one-time achievement. Overthinking will return as it always has. The waves will come, the winds will blow, the stones will fall into the pond. But now you have learned to watch, to breathe, to return to stillness, to reclaim your awareness. And each time the trap loosens a little more. Each time you step further into freedom, into presence, into awakening. And finally, understand this. Awakening is not about becoming someone new. It is about discovering who you already are beneath the patterns, beneath the fears, beneath the incessant noise of the mind. You are already whole, already awake. The trap of overthinking only keeps you from seeing what is already true. And when you awaken, you do not become a different person. You simply remember, you simply see, you simply align with the depth, the clarity, the beauty that has always been within you. So take this as your invitation. Step out of the wheel. Notice the thoughts. Let them spin, let them rise and fall, but do not follow them blindly. Return to the observer, to the awareness that watches, that breathes, that knows. And in this return, in this gentle, patient, constant practice, the mind will no longer be a trap. It will become your ally, your companion, your mirror, showing you not your fears, but your freedom. And as you live in this freedom, as you carry this awareness into every moment, you discover something extraordinary. The world itself changes, not because the world has changed, but because your perception has. The chaos of thought no longer determines your experience. The turbulence of life no longer defines your being. The overthinking that once trapped you now guides you toward presence, clarity, and awakening. And in the end, this is the gift of overthinking. It is not the obstacle you believed it to be. It is the teacher you never realized you had. It is the mirror that reflects the depth, the longing, the consciousness within you. And when you finally see it this way, when you finally integrate observation, awareness, and presence, the trap dissolves, and you awaken fully not in thought, not in theory, not in concept, but in living, breathing, awake reality. Because awakening is not something you achieve. It is something you remember. It is something you uncover beneath the layers of thought, beneath the cycles of fear, beneath the noise of the mind. And in that remembering, in that uncovering, you are free. You are awake. You are whole. And so the hidden trap of overthinking is revealed not as a barrier, but as a guide that shows you where you have been lost and ultimately where you are meant to return, to yourself, to the quiet, to the presence, to the awakening that has always been waiting.